Well, hello everyone. I am Matt Williamson. How's everyone doing? I hope wonderful. I am as well. Beautiful weekend here in the Berg. Long weekend. We are going to talk about pressure today. Under pressure. I shouldn't sing. Don't sing. And what is a pressure? Quarterback or a pass rusher or a pass protector. A pressure is not a sack, but you're pressuring the quarterback. Okay, I think we get all that, right? But someone is deciding what is a pressure. And I don't know the exact definition, but it's a little up in the air exactly what they are. Hang with me. It's going to be the same for everybody. But maybe it's not an exact science of that's how many completions you had. You had 28 completions. Well, your pressure rate was 28%. Well, maybe it's a smidge off here and there depending who decides that. That being said, I don't feel like going down that road. The Steelers quarterbacks. This is pretty crazy. So let me read this sentence to you. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields were the only two players to have a pressure rate of over 40% last season. Partially their fault for holding on to the ball forever, but also not amazing reviews of the Bears and Broncos offensive lines. Behind them were Will Levis and Ryan Tannehill. Levis had a pressure rate of 36.2. Tannehill had one of 36.1. These two were both over 40% of their dropbacks. They were deemed under pressure. That's a ton. A ton. Again, so here's the top of all the qualifiers. Fields is at 41.1%. Russell Wilson's at 40.3%. Tannehill's at 36.2%. So is Levis, 36.1%. DeVito's at 35%. Zach Wilson's at 34.4%. And then we get to Kenny Pickett at 33.6%. So Pickett was under pressure a fair amount as well. No other Steeler quarterbacks qualified, and those are the highest numbers. Then you get to Kirk Cousins, Josh Dobbs, Geno Smith, Bryce Young, Sam Howell. Sam Howell was pressured the most, but his percentage wasn't quite as high as these guys. So, okay, that's not great, but they were with other teams. That is something that obviously needs to be worked on. Now, these stats won't mean much to you, but then I'll compare them to the rest of the league. Fields averaged 2.5 yards per pass attempt when he was pressured. His DVOA, which is kind of like EPA, it's a Football Outsiders thing. This is where this comes from FTN Fantasy. You want to be the highest numbers possible. He's at minus 64.7%, which is really bad, but give me some context here. Wait, hang on that. So again, his yards per attempt when pressured was 2.5. His yards per attempt without pressure was 8.0. So a huge discrepancy there. And his DVOA was 42.3% as opposed to negative 64.7. So he had a differential of 5.4 when not pressured, yards per attempt, and a differential of minus 107.0 DVOA, which I know doesn't mean much to you. So big discrepancies there. But we'll put that in context in a minute. To compare, Russell Wilson averaged 3.5 yards per attempt when pressured, with a minus 45.8 DVOA. So he was better in both accounts. His yards not pressured, though, were less than Fields. They were 7.5 yards without pressure. And his DVOA wasn't quite as good as Fields. It was real close. It was 39%. So his discrepancy is 4 yards per attempt and a minus 84.8. We'll go to Pickett here too. He averaged 2.7 yards when pressured. His DVOA was minus 65% when pressured, but only 6.8 yards per attempt when not pressured. And his DVOA of 36.6 is also without pressure. So his discrepancy was 4.1 and minus 101.6. I'm not going to really harp on Pickett here so much. This is more about the other two because they're the two most pressured quarterbacks in the league last year. So let me get into that and we'll kind of compare what we can expect, what we should take from this information But BetOnline is your number one source for all your summer sports this season, from Major League Baseball, golf, NBA, and NHL playoffs. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head to the website today and use your mobile device to get in on the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, so I have this spreadsheet in front of me, and so I sorted it by percentage of time under pressure. And those two are at the top. As we mentioned, 41%, 40% for Fields and Wilson. They're the only two over 40. Now, if we sort this of how they dealt with the pressure, yards with pressure, they're much different. So they're both kind of right in the middle. Actually, Wilson's one of the best. Wilson's 3.5 is just above Trevor Lawrence. It's behind Hurts, Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, Flacco, Cousins, Dak, and Purdy. That's not bad company. So he produced a lot of yardage while under pressure. Pickett's 2.7 is below average. Fields' 2.5 is pretty well below average. Carr and Tua are between those two at 2.6. And Fields he beats out Jordan Love, who's a good player. Zappy, Burrow, good player. Stroud, Levis. So some of the better quarterbacks in the league are low in terms of yards when pressured, but it's not where you want to be, of course. So if we sort this thing with DVOA when pressured, Wilson, again, is one of the best. I mean, he's only behind Purdy, Allen, Cousins, Prescott, Mahomes, Lamar, and Geno. Okay, his DVOA, how well he produced when pressured. Pickett and Fields are right next to each other. They are right behind Minshew, Lawrence, Dobbs, right ahead of Ritter, Herbert, Flacco, Love. So those are what they did when pressured. When they weren't pressured, we will go, again, give me a second here to sort. Okay. Pickett was at 6.8, which is low. Wilson's at 7.5, which is almost directly in the middle of the league, tied with Carr and Ritter, just behind Mahomes. Fields is tied with Flacco and Will Levis as one of the better ones in the league. I mean, so there's about 10 guys ahead of Fields in terms of yards per pass attempt when not pressured. Now, if we do that for DVOA, they're going to be similar, of course. But DVOA without pressure, the best in the league is Purdy at like 99 and Stroud at 75, Browning at 73, Tua at 69. Fields is about 20th or so at 42. Wilson's about 5 spots behind him at 39. Fields is just behind Mahomes and Flacco, just ahead of Carr and Prescott. And Wilson is just behind Cousins, just ahead of Mayfield and Murray, and then Pickett. So these guys are kind of, all three of them are basically middle of the road to below average in terms of DVOA without pressure. Now, how much of a yard differential compared to the rest of the league are we at here? So, as mentioned, Fields is averaging 5.4 yards per attempt more when not pressured. Pickett's at 4.1, Wilson's at 4. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you're good or bad, but I don't think you want massive discrepancies there. So, for example, Tannehill's at 7.6 difference. DeVito's at 7.5. Browning's at 7. Stroud's at 6.9. Zach Wilson's at 6.4. Guys that are much better without pressure than pressured. Example, the other side, Dak Prescott's only minus 2.4 difference. He's almost the same when pressured and not. The guys right behind him are Cousins, Zappy, Hurts, Dobbs. And then lastly, we'll do that with DVOA as well, as opposed to yards per attempt. and then kind of think about, what are we learning here on this? So Will Levis has a massive discrepancy of minus 171% of pressured versus not. Tannehill's behind him. DeVito, Stroud, Browning, Wilson. A little shocked about Stroud. Getting pressure on Stroud might be a key component to his success. Fields is 18th in that regard with a discrepancy. Pickett is 20th. And Wilson is way down. I mean, it's not necessarily good or bad necessarily, but has a very small difference between when pressured and not. Only 84.8%, which is right next to Mahomes, right next to Burrow, right next to Dobbs and Zappe, below Dak and Cousins. Okay. I mean, I know some of that got a little convoluted on you guys and, what's DVOA and what are these percentages and blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, the moral of the story is these two, their fault or not, which I would say is probably a 50-50 split, were the most pressured quarterbacks in the entire league last year. And actually, only Dak Prescott and Sam Howell threw for more yardage than Russell Wilson when deemed under pressure. So what do we learn about this? What's the Steelers learn about this? More importantly, is everyone talks about the O-line, and we should. Massive upgrades, tons of draft picks, players we all love, psyched to see it. But everyone thinks about it in the run game more so than the pass game. Well, part of drafting a tackle in the first round might be knowing that our quarterbacks are pressured a lot. They hold the football a lot. But that also brings me to route combinations. Things have to be maybe a little clearer for these guys in terms of route combinations and coaching. And lastly, I think this goes without saying, we need to spend extra time, even with the veteran in Wilson, of let's get the ball out of your hands quicker. Let's not invite pressures. Let's get better at processing / pulling the trigger for both these guys. But I find it pretty odd that the two guys that the Steelers picked up, and I think this is more coincidence than what they're looking for, obviously, were the guys that were under pressure the highest percentage in the league last year. They were 1 and 2. That's kind of crazy. So take away what you want from that. Maybe nothing, maybe a lot. I found it interesting for the middle of May and late May and not a ton to talk about. All right, take care.